or CBSE resources. Neural control and coordination. Neural system. Neural system in animal is composed of highly specialized cells called neurons that can detect, receive and transmit different kinds of stimuli. Human neural system. Summary of human neural system is given below. The nerves of PNS are of two types, I afferent fibers and E efferent fibers. Afferent fibers transmit impulses from tissues, organs to the CNS and efferent fibers transmit impulses from CNS to tissues, organs. Structure of neuron. Neuron is the structural and functional unit of neural system. It consists of dendrite, cell body and axon. Cell body, also called cytosol or soma, transmits the signal from dendrites to axon. The cytoplasm of cytosol contains cell organelles and granular bodies called nacelles franules. Short fibers that project out of cell body are called dendrites. The long fiber that emerges out of cytosol is called axon. Bulb-like structure, also known as synaptic knob, present at the distal end axon contains neurotransmitter. Axon is divided into myelinated and non-myelinated axon fiber. Axons that are enveloped by Schwann cells that form myelin sheaths around the axons are called myelinated axon fibers and are found in spinal and cranial nerves. The gaps between two myelin sheaths are called the knots of Ranvier. Axon fibers that are enveloped by Schwann cells that does not form myelin sheaths around the axons are called non-myelinated axon fibers and are found in autonomous and somatic neural system. Diagrammatic representation for structure of neuron is shown in figure 1. Based on the number of axon and dendrites, the neurons are divided into multipolar, bipolar and unipolar. Difference between multipolar, bipolar, and unipolar neuron is shown as table 1. There is an image in the content here. Picture. Figure 1. Structure of a neuron. Source CBSE textbook. There is an image in the content here. Picture. Table 1. Comparison of multipolar, bipolar and unipolar neurons. Source CBSE textbook. Generation and transmission of nerve impulse. There is an image in the content here. Picture. Types of synapses. Impulses transmitted from one neuron to the other through a junction called synapses. There are two types of synapses, electrical synapses and chemical synapses. Differences between electrical and chemical synapses are given below. Differences between electrical and chemical synapse. The structure of brain. Brain is protected by the skull. The brain is covered by 3 layers of cranial meninges consisting of dura mater outer layer, arachnoid middle layer, and pia mater outer layer. The brain is divided into 3 parts: A forebrain, B midbrain and C hindbrain. A forebrain consists of I cerebrum, E thalamus and E hypothalamus. I cerebrum of the cerebral cortex is the largest part of the brain and is divided into left and right hemisphere connected by a tract of nerve fibers called corpus callosum. Cerebral cortex is divided into 4 sections: frontal lobe, parietal lobe, occipital lobe and temporal lobe. Frontal lobe is associated with reasoning, part of speech, emotions and problem solving. Parietal lobe is associated with movement, orientation and perception of speech. Occipital lobe is associated with visual perception and processing. Temporal lobe is associated with perception and processing of auditory stimulus and memory. Thalamus is located below the forebrain. Thalamus is associated with coordination of sensory and motor signaling. Hypothalamus is located at the base of thalamus. Hypothalamus is associated with controlling body temperature. Hypothalamus contains some neurosecretory cells that secrete hypothalamic hormones. Limbic system, made up of thalamus, hypothalamus, amygdala and hippocampus, is located deep within the cerebrum. Limbic lobe is involved in the expression of emotional reactions and regulation of sexual behavior. Midbrain Mesencephalon is located between the forebrain and hindbrain and consists of tectum and tegmentum. A canal called cerebral aqueduct passes through the midbrain. Corpus quadrigemina is 4 round swellings found at the dorsal portion of the midbrain. Hindbrain consists of ions E. cerebellum and E. medulla oblongata. Ions is involved in motor control and sensory analysis. E. cerebellum controls body movement and posture. Medulla is responsible for controlling vital and voluntary activities like respiration, cardiovascular activities and gastric secretions. Midbrain and hindbrain together form brainstem. There is an image in the content here. Picture. Structure of brain. Structure of eye. The wall of eye consists of 3 layers: sclera, choroid and retina. Sclera is the outermost layer made up of dense connective tissue. The anterior portion of sclera is called cornea. Choroid is the middle layer that contains blood vessels. Anterior thick portion of choroid is called the ciliary body, which continues forward to form opaque structure called iris. The aperture surrounded by iris is called the pupil. Transparent eye lens held by ligament is also attached to ciliary body. Retina is the innermost layer that contains 3 layers of cells: ganglion innermost, bipolar middle, and photoreceptor cells outermost. There are 2 types of photoreceptor cells: rods and cones. The cones perceive daylight vision while rods perceive vision in night. The photopigment in the rod is called the rhodopsin or the visual purple. And rhodopsin is composed of opsin, a protein, and retinal, an aldehyde of vitamin A. There are 3 types of cones that contain their own characteristic pigments that respond to red, green, and blue lights. Region where the optical nerve sleeve of the eyeball is devoid of any photoreceptor cells are called the blind spot. Macula luteal, the yellow portion of retina at the posterior pole, has a central pit which contains only cones, called fovea, where the resolution is greatest. The space between the cornea and the lens is called the aqueous chamber that contains aqueous humor. The space between the lens and the retina is called the vitreous chamber that contains vitreous humor. There is an image in the content here. Picture. The structure of an eye. Source: CBA3. Mechanism of vision. The light focused on the retina will cause the dissociation of retinal from opsin, resulting in changes in the structure of opsin, which causes changes in membrane permeability in photoreceptor cells, creating an impulse action potential. This impulse action potential is passed on to the ganglion cells through the bipolar cells. The optic nerves will transmit the impulse to the visual cortex area of the brain, where the impulse is analyzed. And hearing mechanism.
The ear is an important organ that not only assists in hearing, but also helps the body maintain balance. It can be divided into 3 sections: the outer ear, the middle ear, and the inner ear. The outer and middle ear structures assist only in hearing, while the inner ear also helps to maintain the body's equilibrium. The outer ear comprises a funnel-like structure called the pinna and an S-shaped tube called the external auditory meatus. Very fine hairs and wax-secreting sebaceous glands are present on the skin of the pinna and the meatus, which prevent dust and small insects from entering the ear. The pinna is responsible for collecting vibrations in the air and directing sound into the meatus. The meatus further extends into the middle ear. The middle ear consists of an air-filled space called the tympanic cavity that separates the outer and inner ears. The tympanic cavity is bound externally by the tympanic membrane, also known as the eardrum, and internally by an auditory capsule. The tympanic membrane is composed of connective tissue that is covered with skin on the outside and a mucous membrane on the inside. The auditory capsule, on the other hand, has two membrane-bound apertures called the oval window and the round window. The middle ear also has three small movable bones or ossicles called the malleus, incus, and stapes on the floor of the tympanic cavity. These ossicles are attached to one another in a chain-like fashion. They increase the efficiency of transmission of sound waves to the inner ear. Air pressure also needs to be maintained on both sides of the eardrum for normal hearing. This is done by the eustachian tube, which connects the tympanic cavity to the pharynx. The inner ear consists of a complex system of intercommunicating chambers and tubes called a labyrinth. The labyrinth consists of two functional parts: the cochlea, which is responsible for hearing, and the vestibular apparatus, which is responsible for balance. The labyrinth is of two types: bony and membranous. The bony labyrinth is a series of channels filled with a fluid called perilymph, while the membranous labyrinth lies within the bony labyrinth and is filled with endolymph. The cochlea is the coiled portion of the bony labyrinth and is also known as the auditory section of the inner ear. The cochlea, in turn, has two membranes, namely Rissner's membrane and the basilar membrane. Rissner's membrane and the basilar membrane divide the bony labyrinth into an upper section called the scala vestibuli and a lower section called the scala tympani, which are both filled with perilymph. Coming to the membranous labyrinth, the space between the scala vestibuli and scala tympani is called the scala media and is filled with endolymph. The fluids in the labyrinth cushion the soft structures and conduct waves from the middle ear to the organ of Corti. The organ of Corti, located in the scala media, is the actual receptor of sound. It is composed of hair cells that act as auditory receptors. Above the row of hair cells lies a thin elastic membrane called the tectorial membrane. Each hair cell has cilia on an apical part, which are in contact with the tectorial membrane, whose basal end is in contact with afferent nerve fibers. The inner ear also contains a complex system called the vestibular apparatus that helps maintain the body's balance. It is located above the cochlea and consists of 3 semicircular canals and the otolith organ, which consists of the saccule and utricle. Each semicircular canal is C-shaped, lies at right angles to the other two, and is suspended in the perilymph. The swollen base of these canals is called the ampulla, which contains a sensory spot called the crista ampullaris. The saccule and utricle also contain a sensory spot called the macula. Both crista and macula contain hair cells that act as receptors of the vestibular apparatus and are responsible for maintaining the body's balance and posture. Now we'll see how the ears enable us to perceive sounds. The external ear receives sound waves and directs them to the eardrum. The eardrum vibrates in response to sound waves and transmits them through the ear ossicles, the malleus, incus, and stapes to the oval window. The ossicles, in turn, amplify the sound and pass the vibrations through the oval window to the fluid of the cochlea. This generates waves in the lymph that induces a ripple in the basilar membrane. The vibrations of the basilar membrane then bend the hair cells, pressing them against the tectorial membrane. The hairs move back and forth against the tectorial membrane, which stimulates the hair cells or receptor cells. As a result, the hair cells generate nerve impulses, which are transmitted along afferent nerve fibers and auditory nerves to the auditory cortex of the brain. The brain then interprets these nerve impulses and sound is recognized. In this manner, the ear forms an important part of the auditory system and also helps us maintain our balance.